Ma'am, stop right there. Don't move. Don't touch anything.
Officer, I'm the head librarian. What is this about?
I've got a theft complaint with your name on it. Wallet, cash. Answer me.
That's impossible. There are logs, cameras.
Turn
you
around.
need to check.
Hands behind your back. Now, don't argue with me. You're making a mistake. This is all recorded.
At 3:17 p.m., beneath the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the hush of a public library, steel clicked shut around a woman's wrists. The sound cut through the silence like a gunshot she hadn't run. She hadn't resisted. She was the head librarian, 23 years of service, fingerprints still dusty with paper. The accusation came fast. The handcuffs came faster. What followed would expose how easily authority mistakes certainty for truth, and how quietly a life can be dismantled in plain view. Stay with this story. Not for outrage, but for understanding. Because what happened inside that library did end with an arrest. It rippled through policy, pride, and public trust. And the consequences still shape how power is exercised today. At 3:12 p.m., the library was doing what it had done for more than a century, absorbing the noise of the world and returning it as calm. Pages turned softly. A printer coughed and then settled. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, catching dust in the air like slow-moving constellation. The building was full, but it never felt crowded. That was the point. Margaret Ellis moved through the reference section with practiced ease, one hand trailing along the spines as if counting them by touch. She knew this floor the way some people know their own kitchens. Which chair wobbled? Which shelf leaned a fraction of an inch forward? Which regulars preferred the far table's backs to the wall? 23 years as head librarian had trained her eyes to notice small disturbances before they became problems. Noise, friction, unease. She didn't notice the patrol car at first. Outside, the officer sat for a moment longer than necessary, engine idling. Body camera on, audio recording active. Department policy required it the moment he stepped out of the vehicle for a call involving a civilian interaction. He adjusted his vest, checked the radio clipped near his shoulder. Dispatch had been vague: possible theft, possible altercation, public library, caller uncertain. But uncertainty did slow training, it sharpened it. Inside, a young woman at the circulation desk watched the uniform approach the doors and felt her shoulders tighten. Authority did that, even here. Especially here. The officer entered without announcement. His boots sounded louder than they should have against the carpet, each step landing with an unintended finality. A few heads turned. Most did not. Libraries teach people not to look. "Excuse me," he said, voice low but firm, to the clerk. "Who in charge right now?" The clerk gestured instinctively, relief mixed with something else. "Ms. Ellis, over there." Margaret felt the shift before she saw him, the way the air subtly rearranged when order met force. She turned, offered the same professional smile she gave everyone. Students, seniors, the occasionally angry patron who believed overdue fines were moral failings rather than accounting ones. "Can I help you?" she asked. The officer nodded, eyes already scanning. Exit routes, sightlines. I need to speak with you about a complaint." The word complaint landed heavier than it should have. Margaret had handled hundreds. Noise complaints. Computer disputes. A man once furious that the encyclopedia was outdated. This felt different. The officer hadn't lowered his voice. He hadn't suggested privacy. "What kind of complaint?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. A pause, trained, deliberate. "I'm going to need you to step over here." They moved between stacks, the camera following, red recording light blinking. A few patrons watched now, curiosity prying at the rules of silence. Margaret noticed her hands, suddenly unsure what to do with them. She folded them, unfolded them, left them at her sides. The officer spoke again, clipped. "We received a report that you took personal property from a patron without authorization." Margaret blinked. "Once. I am sorry. A wallet," he said. "Cash inside. Approximately $200. The accusation didn't spark anger at first. It sparked confusion. Real, disorienting confusion. "That's not possible," she said quietly. "If there was lost property, it would be logged. You can check the—" "Ma'am," he interrupted, not raising his voice, but hardening it. "I need you to stop talking for a moment." That was when the room changed. Procedure took over where conversation might have gone. The officer asked her to turn around. She hesitated, not in defiance, but disbelief. He interpreted it as resistance. His hand closed around her wrist. Cool metal followed. The sound of handcuffs snapping shut echoed far louder than it should have. Conversations died. A child looked up from a picture book. Someone whispered, "What happened?" Margaret stood very still, her face drained of color, not from fear, but from something colder, a sudden understanding that explanation had been removed from the process. At 3:17 p.m., the officer announced the arrest. Time logged, location confirmed. In a room built for quiet, authority had made its loudest possible statement, and nothing that followed would be quiet again. The patrol car smelled faintly of disinfectant and warm plastic. Margaret sat in the back, hands cuffed in front now, an adjustment made after. She asked calmly whether policy allowed it for non-violent suspects. The officer hadn't answered her. He had just shifted the restraints, eyes forward, jaw set. The body camera stayed on. Policy required continuous recording during transport. Silence filled the space where reassurance might have lived. As the car pulled away, the library disappeared behind them, brick facade shrinking. In the side mirror, banners fluttering gently as if nothing had happened. Margaret watched until it was gone, trying to keep her breathing slow. She had trained herself over decades to de-escalate situations with words. Now words were currency she didn't seem to possess. Up front, the officer rehearsed the facts the way training taught him to. Complaint received. Alleged theft. Suspect identified by name and position. Opportunity established. In the academy, they called it narrative cohesion, how to organize uncertainty into a shape that justified action. Probable cause didn't require certainty. It required reasonableness. That distinction mattered. It was what allowed decisions to be made quickly. It was also where mistakes hid. At 3:26 p.m., he radioed in the transport. Dispatch acknowledged. Timestamp recorded. Everything aligned on paper. Margaret finally spoke. "Officer," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "May I ask who made the complaint?" He hesitated. Not long enough to break protocol, but long enough to feel it. "That's not something I can discuss right now." "I understand," she said. "But I'd like to state, for the record, that I did not take anyone's property. There are cameras, logs, procedures." The word procedures brushed against something defensive in him. He had procedures too. He had followed them. Mostly. At the precinct, the fluorescent lights were harsher than the library's, less forgiving. The air buzzed with low conversation and ringing phone. Margaret was guided to a bench, cuffs removed only after another officer confirmed her compliance level. Nonviolent, cooperative, middle-aged. Categories slid neatly into boxes on a screen. Her belongings were inventoried. Keys, phone, reading glasses. A folded note from a patron she hadn't had time to answer yet. Each item was listed, initialed, sealed. She watched the process with an almost academic detachment, noting the care given to objects while her reputation remained unsecured. The officer stepped aside to complete the arrest report. He typed quickly, muscle memory filling fields, location, time, charge. Theft under state statute misdemeanor, but arrestable. The probable cause section demanded narrative. He described the complaint, the identification, the confrontation. He did not mention the absence of corroboration. He did not mention that he hadn't reviewed internal logs or security footage. Those were investigative steps, he told himself. Post-arrest, not prerequisites. Internal affairs, training manuals warned against confirmation bias, how once a suspect was framed. Contrary evidence felt like disruption rather than information. He knew this. He had passed the exams, but the manuals didn't account for pride or the subtle pressure of making a clean call in a public place under watching eyes. Margaret was fingerprinted at 3:41 p.m. Ink pressed into skin, rolled carefully. She thought of all the times she had guided children through their first library. Card applications, fingers smudged with ink, smiling at the novelty of it. The memory stung, not because it was sad, but because it felt absurdly distant. A supervising sergeant glanced at the file. "You sure about this?" he asked the arresting officer quietly. "Yes, sir," came the answer, quick. Too quick, the sergeant nodded. He had a dozen other things to manage. Probable cause had been articulated. That was enough to move the system forward. Doubt, if it came, could be sorted out later. Margaret sat alone in a holding room, the door heavy, the window narrow. She didn't cry. She cataloged. What would happen next? Who would need to be called? How long administrative leave would last? If it came to that, she understood systems. She had built her career inside one. What she didn't understand, what no training had prepared her for, was how easily a life of order could be reclassified as an exception. Down the hall, the officer finished the report and signed his name. The act felt final. Ink drying. Narrative set. Probable cause established. And once established, it would take far more than certainty to undo it. By the time Margaret was released, on her own recognizance, dusk had settled into the city with administrative indifference. No apology accompanied the paperwork, just a signature line, a court date, and the quiet instruction to keep the documents safe. She stepped outside the precinct at 7:02 p.m. The air cooler than she expected, as if the day had aged without her consent. Her phone, returned with its battery nearly dead, vibrated the moment it powered on. Missed calls stacked like accusations. The library director, human resources. A number she did. T recognized, likely a reporter. Already tracing the edges of a story that hadn't T yet learned restraint. By 8:15 p.m., the city's online blotter updated name, age, charge, head librarian, arrested on theft allegation. No context, no qualifiers, just a fact-shaped object placed into public space, where it would harden. Administrative leave arrived the next morning by email. It was brief, neutral in tone, carefully worded to imply neither guilt nor faith. Pending investigation, standard protocol. Margaret read it twice, then forwarded it to her union representative. Procedure met procedure, that was how survival worked now. At the library, her absence was noticed before it was explained. Staff whispered. Patrons asked. A temporary supervisor was assigned. Unfamiliar with the rhythms Margaret had cultivated for decades, small disruptions multiplied. A misshelved return card. A children's program canceled for lack of approval. The building felt the loss in ways no memo could articulate. The internal review began on day 3. Risk management requested documents, training logs, incident report. The officer's narrative arrived as a PDF, clean and confident. Probable cause stated. Actions justified. Margaret read it slowly, recognizing herself only as a role the suspect stripped of history. Her attorney, assigned through the union, flagged the omissions immediately. No witness statements attached. No security footage referenced. They moved fast, he said, not unkindly. That cuts both ways. Across town, the officer received notice of a routine administrative inquiry. Standard when an arrest drew media attention. He told himself it would pass. He had seen worse. Still, he replayed the moment in the stacks, the hesitation. The way her eyes searched his face for permission to explain. He pushed the thought aside. Doubt was a luxury for off-duty hours. Discovery took months. Requests went out. Deadlines extended. The city asked for patience, while it gathered records it had always possessed. When the library's internal cameras were finally reviewed, the footage was unremarkable. Margaret at her desk. Patrons moving in and out. No wallet, no exchange. The complainant's statement, when examined, wavered on details, time, location, even the amount of cash. The charge was quietly dismissed before arraignment. Insufficient evidence. The notice came without fanfare, filed on a Tuesday afternoon. Margaret learned of it from her lawyer, not the city. The blotter did not update. Retractions rarely traveled as far as accusations. But dismissal did not restore what had been logged. The arrest remained in databases. Background checks? Search results. The long record had a memory longer than justice. Civil counsel entered next. The language changed. Words like liability and exposure replaced truth. Depositions were scheduled. The officer sat under oath, posture stiff, answers measured. He was asked why he hadn't verified the complaint before making the arrest. He cited training, public safety, discretion. Each answer was defensible. Together, they formed a pattern. Margaret testified later, voice steady, eyes fixed on a point just beyond the room. She described the sound of the cuffs, the way silence turned against her. She did not dramatize. She did need to. The facts carried their own weight. As the case moved forward, settlement discussions began not as an admission but as a calculation. Risk versus cost, precedent versus privacy. The city's attorney spoke of efficiency. Margaret spoke of sleep lost, trust broken. A career placed on pause by a single unchecked assumption the officer received. Notice that his actions were under review for policy compliance. No suspension, no discipline yet. Just a note in a file, another record, beginning to form. And in the space between dismissal and accountability, the truth waited, patient, but no longer quiet. Discovery did not arrive with revelation. It arrived in boxes, cardboard, stamped and numbered, stacked against a law office wall like a quiet accusation. Inside them lived the city's member emails archived by retention policy, train manuals revised by committee, body camera footage cataloged down to the second. Nothing emotional, nothing personal, just records. That was the promise of discovery. That truth, if it existed, would survive in documents long after memory softened. Margaret sat at the conference table while her attorney slid the first binder toward her. The room smelled faintly of toner and burnt coffee. She didn't open it right away. She had learned patience since the arrest, how waiting could be a form of control. Across town, in a municipal building designed to look neutral, the officer reviewed the same materials with city council. The tone was different there, efficient, protective. Answer only what's asked, the attorney reminded him. Don't speculate. He nodded. He had testified before. Still, his jaw tightened when the body cam footage began to play. The timestamp glowed in the corner of the screen, 15:14:32. Arrival at the library. The camera captured his entry, the scan of the room, Margaret turning toward him. The audio picked up her voice, calm, professional, unguarded, when the cuffs clicked on at 15:17:9. The sound was sharp enough to make him flinch. He hadn't remembered it being that loud. In deposition, the questions were narrow, almost gentle. Did you review any internal lost and found logs before placing Ms. Ellis under arrest? No. Did you request access to security footage prior to handcuffing her? No. Are you familiar with departmental guidance on corroboration for nonviolent theft allegations? Yes. The pauses between answers grew longer. Silence under oath carried weight. Margaret's deposition followed 2 weeks later. She wore the same gray blazer she had worn to board meetings. A quiet act of reclamation. She described the system she had built: check-in protocols, incident reports, the chain of custody for lost items. When asked how the arrest affected her, she didn't list emotions. She listed consequences. Sleep disrupted, stat confidence shaken. A job she loved now conditional. One document shifted the tone of the room. A training bulletin, circulated department-wide 3 months before the arrest, emphasizing de-escalation and verification in public space complaints. The officer had signed for it digitally. The city's attorney marked it as reviewed. No one spoke for a moment. Mediation was scheduled, then postponed, then rescheduled. Numbers were floated without commitment. The city framed it as closure. Margaret framed it as acknowledgement. Neither used the word apology. That was not how systems spoke. Outside the process, smaller reforms began to appear. A policy memo requiring supervisory approval before arrests in municipal buildings. Updated body cam review procedures. Quiet changes, unaccompanied by press releases. The city learned the way it always did, incrementally, and only when compelled. The officer received notice of corrective training. No suspension. No public reprimand. A line added to his personnel file, neutral in language, permanent in effect. He read it twice, then closed the folder. Accountability, he realized, did not always announce itself. Sometimes it settled in slowly, like a weight redistributed. As discovery concluded, the narrative that had once felt solid began to thin. Probable cause, dissected, looked less like reason and more like momentum. The facts had not changed. Their order had. When the final mediation date was set, both sides understood what it meant. Not vindication. Not victory. Resolution. And in that word lived both relief and loss. The city council meeting began on time. It always did. Public comment, consent agenda, budget revisions routine as weather. The settlement sat midway through the docket, item 7B. Its language flattened by legal necessity. Authorization to approve civil claim in the amount of $320,000, No names in the title, no story, just a sum and a signature. Margaret sat in the back row, hands folded, posture straight. She had been offered the option not to attend. Many plaintiffs did, but absence felt like erasure, and she had learned the cost of that. The room was bright, the kind of brightness meant to suggest transparency. She recognized none of the council members personally. They recognized her only through briefing notes. When the item was called, there was no debate. A question about insurance coverage. A clarification on funding sources, then a vote. Unanimous. The gavel fell with a sound softer than the cuffs had been months earlier. Resolution achieved. The city issued a statement that afternoon. The settlement reflects a mutual desire to avoid prolonged litigation. It emphasized policy updates, training enhancements, commitment to public trust. It did not mention the library. It did not mention the sound of metal in a quiet room. Margaret, as return to work, was framed as reinstatement, but it felt more like reconstruction. Her office was the same, yet altered files moved, routines adjusted without her. Some staff met her eyes with relief, others with caution. Trust, once interrupted, did not reset on command. She moved slowly, deliberately, relearning the space as if it were new. The officer transferred precincts 2 months later. The move was described as routine. It often was. He completed the additional training, signed the acknowledgments, returned to patrol. On paper, his career continued. In practice, something had shifted. He found himself pausing longer before decisions, hearing the echo of questions not asked in time. Probable cause no longer felt abstract. The reforms outlived the case. Supervisory checks became habit. Public building arrests declined. Body cam reviews expanded, none of it made headlines. That, perhaps, was the point. Systems rarely change in moments of spectacle. They change in footnotes, in margins, in revisions no one applauds. Margaret used part of the settlement to fund a community program, legal literacy workshops hosted in the very room where she had been arrested. It wasn't too symbolic, it was practical. People deserve to understand the systems that govern them, especially when those systems failed. Justice, she learned, did not arrive as balance restored. It arrived as fatigue, as paperwork closed, as the quiet understanding that accountability, when it comes, is administrative and incomplete, but still necessary. On her first afternoon back, at 3:07 p.m., Margaret stood between the stacks and listened, pages turning. A printer coughing, the library absorbing the world again. The sound of silence returned. And this time it held.